The courtroom fell silent as the 7-year-old girl rose to her feet, her small frame trembling but determined. Rebecca Kraft had never spoken a single word in her entire life. Until today. I speak. The two words hung in the air like an impossible miracle. Even the court reporter's fingers froze over her keyboard. Every eye in the room turned to this tiny child who'd been silent for 7 years, now standing between a homeless teenager in handcuffs and the judge who held his fate. Michael sat at the defendant's table, his bruised face a map of the fight he'd waged to protect his sister. He looked at Rebecca with tears streaming down his face, silently begging her not to do this, not to break her precious silence for him. But Rebecca's blue eyes were fierce. She pointed at Michael with a trembling finger, and words she'd hoarded for 7 years came tumbling out in a rush. Michael, teach me. He see me. Not broken. Rebecca, just Rebecca. The judge leaned forward, his gavel forgotten. Young lady, how long have you been silent? 7 years. Her voice cracked but didn't break. And I speak now for Michael. He is family. In that moment, everyone in the courtroom understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. Not just a child finding her voice, but love proving it could speak louder than any law, any prejudice, any barrier the world could build. This is the story of how a billionaire's silent daughter and a homeless boy did the unthinkable. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back 3 months to a Tuesday morning and a collection of garbage bins that would change everything. Before we dive into this incredible story, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our stories. Also, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love connecting with our amazing community around the world. Now let's get into the story. George Kraft stood in his daughter's therapy room, watching yet another specialist pack up their equipment in defeat. Dr. Morrison, supposedly the best childhood speech pathologist in the country, couldn't hide her frustration as she snapped her briefcase shut with more force than necessary. Mr. Kraft, I've tested everything, she said, her voice carrying the weight of professional failure. Rebecca's vocal cords are perfect. Her hearing is above average. Brain scans show normal activity in all speech areas. There is absolutely no medical reason why she can't speak. George's jaw tightened, his hand gripping the doorframe. Then why doesn't she? Dr. Morrison's eyes softened with something that looked uncomfortably close to pity. Sometimes children make a choice, conscious or unconscious. Rebecca has chosen silence, and I don't know why. 7 years. 7 years of this exact conversation with different doctors in different cities. 7 years of hope building and crashing like waves against an immovable shore. George watched through the observation window as his wife, Linda, read a bedtime story to their silent daughter. Rebecca's blue eyes tracked every word on the page with fierce intelligence, her small hands signing responses in the elaborate sign language she'd mastered by age 4. She understood everything. She could communicate through writing, signing, and an iPad app that spoke for her in a cheerful robotic voice that made George's heart ache every time he heard it. But her voice, the one thing her parents desperately wanted to hear, the sound that haunted Linda's dreams, remained locked away like a secret Rebecca refused to share. Later that night, after Rebecca had fallen asleep clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, George found Linda standing at their daughter's doorway, tears streaming silently down her face. Sometimes I wonder if she's punishing us, Linda whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. For what? George moved beside her, wrapping an arm around his wife's trembling shoulders. We've given her everything. Maybe that's the problem. Linda's laugh was bitter, hollow. Maybe we've given her everything except what she actually needs. George had no answer for that. What could he say? They'd spent millions on specialists from Switzerland, experimental treatments from Japan, music therapy, art therapy, horse therapy, therapies he hadn't even known existed until they'd tried them. Their home had become a revolving door of experts, each one promising breakthrough and delivering nothing but disappointment and increasingly expensive invoices. The next morning arrived like every other. Rebecca woke at exactly 7 o'clock, dressed herself in the outfit the styling consultant had selected, ate her organic breakfast prepared by their private chef, and began her homeschooling with Mrs. Peterson. She completed every assignment perfectly, her written answers showing intelligence that left her tutors in awe. Her essays were poetic. Her mathematics were flawless. Her artwork hung in every hallway of their mansion, each piece a window into a mind that refused to speak, but had so much to say. But not a sound escaped her lips. George watched from his home office, the familiar ache settling into his chest like an old companion. His daughter was a ghost in her own life, present but not really there, visible but not truly seen. He'd built an empire, commanded boardrooms, made grown men tremble with a single glance. But he couldn't reach his own child. All his power, all his wealth, all his influence, utterly useless against the fortress of silence his daughter had built around herself. And he had no idea that everything was about to change. The crash from the back of the mansion shattered the morning's careful silence. George's head snapped up from his laptop, his hand already reaching for his phone to call security. Their private waste collection service wasn't scheduled until Thursday, and it was barely 8 in the morning. Through his office window, he could see someone at their recycling bins. A teenage boy, maybe 16 or 17, methodically sorting through their discarded bottles and cans. George's finger hovered over the security button, but something made him pause. The kid wasn't making a mess. In fact, he was organizing everything with surprising care, separating glass from plastic with practiced efficiency that spoke of routine rather than desperation. The boy was thin, his clothes clearly second-hand but clean, his hair in neat twists despite his obvious poverty. He handled each item carefully, almost reverently, humming a tune George didn't recognize. There was something about the way he moved, a dignity that all of George's money couldn't buy, that made him lower his phone. Then George's heart stopped. Rebecca appeared in the backyard. His daughter never went outside alone. She was supposed to be in her mathematics lesson right now, safely ensconced in the study with Mrs. Peterson. But there she was, standing perfectly still in her yellow dress, watching the intruder with an expression George had never seen on her face before. Curiosity. The boy looked up and saw her. George expected him to run, to grab his half-filled bag and bolt. Instead, the teenager smiled. Not the practiced, careful smile of Rebecca's therapists, but something genuine and warm that seemed to light up the morning. "Hey there, little one," the boy said gently, his voice carrying through the open window. "Didn't mean to make noise, just collecting recyclables, you know, saving the planet one bottle at a time." Rebecca tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "I'm Michael," the boy continued, completely unfazed by her silence. "What's your name?" Rebecca, of course, said nothing. But instead of the usual awkwardness that followed when people realized she wouldn't respond, Michael just nodded like her silence was the most natural thing in the world. "That's cool. You don't have to talk. I talk enough for 10 people, my mama always said." His smile faltered for just a moment. God rest her soul. Then he did something extraordinary. He sat down on the grass, right there next to the garbage bins, and gestured to the spot beside him. "Want to see something cool?" George watched, transfixed, as Rebecca, his daughter who never engaged with strangers, who retreated from every attempt at connection, sat down next to this homeless boy. Michael held up a green glass bottle to catch the morning light. You know what I love about bottles? They sing. Listen. He blew across the top, creating a low, haunting note that seemed to shimmer in the air. Every bottle has its own voice. This one's a baritone. The clear ones are usually sopranos. Rebecca's eyes widened with something George hadn't seen in years. Wonder. Want to try? Michael offered her a smaller bottle. Rebecca looked back at the house, as if asking permission from the universe itself. Then she took the bottle and held it to her lips. No sound came out, but she mimed blowing, her cheeks puffing out comically. Michael laughed, not at her, but with pure delight. That's the spirit. You're a natural bottle musician. For 20 minutes, George stood frozen at his window, watching a miracle unfold. This boy with nothing but recycled bottles and genuine kindness had made his daughter try something new, had made her smile, had treated her like a normal kid who happened to prefer silence rather than a problem that needed solving. When Michael finally stood to leave, dragging his bag of recyclables, Rebecca did something that made George's breath catch. She waved, not the mechanical wave therapists had taught her, but an enthusiastic, whole-arm wave that said clear as day, "Please come back." "Same time Thursday?" Michael asked. "That's recycling day for this whole block, prime bottle hunting time." Rebecca nodded so hard her blonde curls bounced. Mrs. Peterson's voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Rebecca, you're supposed to be in lessons. And you—" She glared at Michael from the doorway. "You're trespassing. I'm calling the police." "No." George surprised himself by shouting, rushing outside. "No, it's fine. He's allowed." Mrs. Peterson looked scandalized, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "I'm leaving," Michael said quietly, shouldering his bag with dignity intact. "Sorry for the trouble, sir. Won't happen again." Rebecca's face crumbled. She grabbed George's hand and pointed frantically at Michael, then at herself, her eyes pleading in a way that shattered something in George's chest. "Thursday," George heard himself say. "You can come back Thursday." Michael's smile could have powered the entire city. "Thursday it is. See you then, little musician." Thursday morning arrived with Rebecca already at the back door before sunrise, a collection of bottles arranged on the steps like offerings at an altar. George found her there at 6:30, still in her pajamas, staring down the driveway with an intensity that made his throat tight. She'd saved them. Every bottle from the past 2 days, hidden away in her closet, carefully cleaned and sorted. His daughter, who'd never shown sustained interest in anything beyond her own carefully controlled world, had spent 2 days preparing for the return of a boy she'd met for 20 minutes. When Michael appeared just after 8, his face lit up at the sight of her waiting. "You saved these for me?" He knelt down, examining her collection with genuine appreciation. "That's beautiful, little one. But you know what? How about we split the profit? Partners?" Rebecca's eyes went wide. No one had ever offered to be her partner in anything. She was always the patient, the student, the problem to be solved. Never an equal. For the next hour, they sorted bottles together while Michael talked about everything and nothing. How glass was made from sand and fire. Why recycling mattered for the planet. Stories about the interesting things he'd found in rich people's garbage. A telescope that still worked, books that opened whole worlds, a guitar missing only one string. "Found a whole telescope once," he said, holding a blue bottle up to the light. "Still work too. Now I know all the constellations. Want to know my favorite? Rebecca nodded eagerly, leaning closer. Cassiopeia. She was a queen who talked too much. So the gods put her in the sky upside down to teach her humility. He paused, something thoughtful crossing his face. But I think maybe she just needed someone to listen to her properly, you know? Rebecca's hand moved unconsciously to her throat, touching it gently. Linda had been watching from the kitchen window, her coffee growing cold in her hands. She came outside with a tray of sandwiches, prosciutto and arugula on artisan bread, trying to act casual but clearly desperate to understand what magic this boy possessed. "You must be hungry," she offered, her voice carefully controlled. Michael looked at the fancy sandwiches with polite confusion. "Thank you, ma'am, but I'm okay." "Please." The word cracked slightly in Linda's throat. "Join us." They sat on the back porch, an unlikely trio. The billionaire's wife in her designer dress, the homeless teen in his thrift store clothes, and the silent girl who connected them. Rebecca sat between them, close enough to Michael that their shoulders touched, a gesture of trust she'd never shown any of her therapists. "She seems to like you," Linda ventured carefully, each word measured. "Rebecca's cool," Michael said simply, taking a careful bite of his sandwich. "She listens better than anyone I know." Linda's laugh was sharp, almost bitter. "But she can't talk." Michael shrugged, completely unbothered. "So what? My grandma used to say the wisest people speak the least. Rebecca probably has so much wisdom stored up when she finally does talk, it'll change the world." The simple certainty in his voice made Linda's eyes fill with tears. "How do you do it?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "We've tried everything. Specialists from Switzerland, experimental treatments, music therapy, art therapy, horse therapy." "Maybe that's the problem," Michael said gently, then seemed to realize he'd overstepped. Sorry, that's not my place to..." "No." Linda leaned forward. "Please, tell me." Michael glanced at Rebecca, who was watching him with those intelligent blue eyes. "You're trying to fix her, but she ain't broken. She's just selective. My mama used to say some people are like rare flowers. They only bloom when they feel truly safe." The words hung in the air, like a revelation. Linda looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw Rebecca leaning against this boy's shoulder, with an ease she'd never shown her own mother. That afternoon, after Michael left with his bag of carefully sorted recyclables and a promise to return next Tuesday, George sat in his office, reviewing the background check his security team had compiled. Michael Williams, 17 years old, turned 18 next week. Parents dead in a car accident 2 years ago. Currently living in a youth shelter downtown. Younger sister Jasmine, 15, staying with an aunt in a crowded apartment across town. Michael collected recyclables to save money for his sister's school supplies and future education. Clean record. Good grades when he managed to attend school between survival. No gang affiliations. No criminal history. No red flags. Just a kid trying to keep his family together with nothing but dignity and determination. "We should hire him," George told Linda that evening, watching Rebecca at her window, clearly waiting for Thursday to come around again. Officially, as a companion for Rebecca. "He won't accept charity," Linda said softly. She'd learned that much in one morning. "He has too much pride." "Then we make it a real job," George replied. "Because I don't think we can afford to lose him." They both knew he wasn't talking about money. The police sirens shattered the night at 2 a.m, their blue and red lights painting Rebecca's bedroom walls like a nightmare come to life. George bolted upright, his first instinct to check on his daughter. He found her already at the window, her small hand pressed against the glass, tears streaming down her silent face. "They're taking Michael," Linda whispered from the doorway, her voice breaking on his name. Through the window, they could see it all unfolding on the street below. Michael in handcuffs, his face bruised and swelling, his lips split and bleeding. Two police officers pushing him toward their cruiser with unnecessary force. His white t-shirt was torn and stained with blood. But his eyes searched the mansion windows until they found Rebecca's room. Even from this distance, even through the darkness and flashing lights, George saw Michael smile at her. That same warm, genuine smile. He mouthed words they couldn't hear. "It's okay, little musician." Rebecca's mouth opened, her whole body tensed with effort, trembling like a wire pulled too tight. George watched in horror and hope as his daughter tried to scream, tried to call out to him, tried to make her voice work for the first time in 7 years. Her face contorted with the strain, her small hands clawing at her throat as if she could physically pull the sound out. But nothing came, just air and effort and desperation. Then the police car pulled away, taking Michael with it, and Rebecca collapsed to the floor. Her silent sobs were somehow more devastating than any sound could have been, her whole body convulsing with grief she had no voice to express. George was already on his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed his lawyer. Linda gathered Rebecca into her arms, rocking her like she hadn't done since their daughter was a baby. "What did he do?" Linda demanded when George hung up. What could Michael possibly have done? George's face was ashen. He didn't do anything wrong. He was protecting Jasmine. Some older boys were... He glanced at Rebecca and chose his words carefully. They were trying to hurt her. Michael fought them off, but he turned 18 last week. The other boys are minors. Their parents are pressing charges. That's insane. Linda's voice rose. He was defending his sister. I know. George was already dialing another number. I know. Rebecca suddenly stood up, her face fierce with a determination George had never seen before. She grabbed her iPad from her nightstand and typed furiously, her fingers flying over the screen with violent purpose. Then she showed it to her parents, the words glowing in the dark room. Save him. He saved me first. Sweetheart. George knelt beside her, trying to understand. Michael didn't save you. Rebecca threw the iPad across the room. It hit the wall with a crack that made them all flinch, the screen spiderwebbing into 1,000 fractures. It was the first violent action of her entire life. And then she opened her mouth and forced out a sound. Not a word, not even close to a word. Just a raw, primal cry of anguish that seemed to be ripped from the depths of her soul. It was guttural and broken and desperate. The sound of 7 years of silence being shattered by pure need. George and Linda froze, their eyes wide with shock. Their daughter had made a sound. After 7 years of nothing, Rebecca had found her voice in the worst possible way, in fear and grief and rage. The sound died in her throat, leaving her gasping and crying. But the silence that followed wasn't the same silence as before. Something had broken. Something had changed. By morning, George had mobilized an army of lawyers and posted Michael's bail. He drove to the courthouse himself, needing to see the boy, needing to make this right. Michael emerged from processing looking exhausted, his bruises darker in the harsh morning light. Thank you, Mr. Kraft, Michael said quietly. I'll pay you back, I swear, every dollar. That's not, George started, but Michael cut him off. I can't come to your house anymore. Michael's voice was flat, defeated. I can't bring my troubles to your door. Rebecca doesn't need to see this mess. She doesn't need... Rebecca needs you." George's voice cracked on the words he never thought he'd say. "She made a sound last night. When she saw them taking you away, she tried to scream." Michael's eyes filled with tears that he blinked away furiously. "She found her voice because of pain. That's not how it should happen, Mr. Kraft. That's not—" "Then come back," George interrupted. "Show her that you're okay. Show her that speaking doesn't have to come from fear. She needs to see you, Michael. We all do." Michael looked at this billionaire standing in front of a courthouse, begging a homeless teenager to come back to his mansion, and saw something he'd never expected to see in a man like George Kraft. Desperation that matched his own. "Okay," Michael whispered finally. "Okay." When Michael walked through the Kraft mansion's front door, the actual front door, not the back entrance by the garbage bins, Rebecca was waiting in the foyer. The moment she saw him, she ran. Not walked, not hesitated, but ran with a desperation that made George's chest ache. She crashed into Michael with enough force that he stumbled backward, her thin arms wrapping around his waist and holding on like he might disappear if she let go. Michael knelt down to her level, his bruised face gentle despite the pain it must have caused. "Hey, little musician. I'm okay, see?" He touched his split lip carefully. "Just a few battle scars. Makes me look tough, right?" Rebecca touched his face with trembling fingers, tracing the bruises as if she could heal them through touch alone. Her eyes were red from crying, her hair uncombed, so unlike her usual perfect appearance that it startled George how much his daughter's careful control had slipped. "I had to protect my sister," Michael explained quietly. "Just like I'd protect you. That's what friends do." Rebecca looked at him for a long moment, her blue eyes searching his face. Then she took his hand and led him through the mansion to the grand living room, where a piano sat untouched despite years of expensive lessons. She pointed at the piano, then at Michael, her meaning clear even without words. "You want me to play?" Michael looked uncertain. "I don't really know how." Rebecca climbed onto the bench and patted the spot beside her with insistence that brooked no argument. Then she did something remarkable. She placed Michael's fingers on specific keys and pressed them down, creating a simple melody. She repeated the pattern slowly, looking at him expectantly, waiting for him to try. "You want me to learn this?" Understanding dawned on Michael's face. Rebecca nodded and played the pattern again, patient as Michael fumbled through it. His fingers were clumsy on the keys, hitting wrong notes and breaking the rhythm. But Rebecca didn't show frustration. She just demonstrated again and again, adjusting his hand position, nodding encouragement when he got it right. It took 15 minutes before Michael could play the simple melody without mistakes. When he finally did, Rebecca smiled and added her own harmony with her left hand, their music blending together into something neither could create alone. Linda stood in the doorway recording everything on her phone, tears streaming down her face. In 7 years of the world's best music therapists, occupational therapists, and specialists, no one had thought to let Rebecca be the teacher instead of always being the student. Over the next 2 weeks, while Michael's case worked its way through the legal system, he came to the mansion every day. They developed an elaborate communication system that went beyond Rebecca's usual signs and typed words. They had inside jokes that needed no explanation, shared glances that conveyed entire conversations, a rhythm of understanding that felt almost telepathic. One afternoon, Michael told Rebecca about his mother, while his fingers traced idle patterns on the piano keys. She used to sing to me when I was scared. This old gospel song about joy coming in the morning. When she died, I thought I'd never feel joy again." He paused, looking at Rebecca. "But you know what? She was right. It just took a while for morning to come." Rebecca listened with an intensity that seemed to pull the words right out of him. "My sister Jasmine, she looks a lot like you. Not on the outside, obviously." He smiled slightly. "But inside, she feels everything so deeply, you know? Sometimes it's too much for words." Rebecca pointed to herself, then made the gesture they'd developed that meant, "Me too. I know, little musician. I knew from the first day." Michael's voice was soft. "You're not silent because you can't speak. You're silent because you feel too much. Words would make it smaller, and you don't want small feelings. You want the big ones." Rebecca stood suddenly and walked to her room. She returned with a piece of paper she'd been hiding, pressing it into Michael's hands with shy determination. It was a drawing, crude but clear, of two figures holding hands, one tall and dark, one small and light. Above them, she'd written one word over and over in careful letters, practicing until it was perfect. Friend, 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 friend. "Oh, Rebecca." Michael's voice broke. "Yes, always. Friends forever." Rebecca leaned against his shoulder, and for the first time since the night of his arrest, her breathing came easy. Michael wrapped an arm around her small shoulders, and they sat there in comfortable silence that wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything words could never say. The Thursday afternoon started like any other they'd shared over the past weeks. Rebecca and Michael sat on the back steps where they'd first met, sorting through a modest collection of bottles more out of ritual than necessity. The autumn sun was warm on their faces, and Michael was talking about everything and nothing, the way he always did. "You know what I miss most about my mama?" Michael said suddenly, holding a green bottle up to catch the light. "The way she understood silence. Some people, they get nervous when you're quiet. They fill it up with noise because they think silence means something's wrong. But Mama, she knew silence could be full too." Rebecca's hand stilled on the bottle she was holding. "She used to tell me and Jasmine that feeling things deeply isn't a weakness. It's a gift." Michael's voice grew softer. "Jasmine, she's like you in that way. Everything hits her harder: joy, sadness, fear, love. Sometimes she can't find words big enough to hold what she feels." He looked at Rebecca, really looked at her, and something passed between them that George, watching from his office window, couldn't quite name. "I think that's you too, little musician. You're not silent because something's broken. You're silent because you feel too much, and words would make it smaller. They'd reduce it. And you don't want small feelings. You want the big ones, the real ones. The ones that fill up your whole chest until you think you might burst." Rebecca's eyes were wide, glistening with tears she didn't let fall. Her hand moved to her throat, touching it the way she always did when emotion overwhelmed her. "It's okay," Michael said gently. "You don't have to explain. I already understand." Rebecca took a deep breath. Michael could see her gathering something inside herself. Her mouth opened slightly, her lips forming a shape. George abandoned his desk and moved to the window, his heart suddenly pounding. "Happy?" The word was barely a whisper, so soft that Michael almost thought he'd imagined it. But he saw her lips move, saw the effort it took, saw the fear and courage warring in her eyes. Michael didn't gasp or shout or make a big deal of it. He just smiled that warm, genuine smile of his and whispered back, "Me too." "Happy?" Rebecca said it again, louder this time, like she was tasting the word, testing its weight on her tongue. Then she pointed at Michael with one trembling finger. Happy. She pointed at the house where her parents stood frozen in the doorway. Happy. She pointed at herself, pressing her hand to her chest. Happy. Linda collapsed into George's arms, her sobs muffled against his shoulder. 7 years of silence, broken by one perfect word. But Rebecca wasn't finished. She looked at Michael, gathering courage from somewhere deep inside, and added another word. Stay. 2 words. After 7 years of nothing, 2 words that meant everything. Wild horses couldn't drag me away, Michael promised, his own voice thick with emotion. Then George's phone rang, shattering the moment. He answered it automatically, still watching his daughter, and his face went pale as his lawyer delivered the news. The other families weren't just pressing charges, they were filing a civil suit. If they won, Michael would go to juvenile detention until he was 21. No. The word exploded from Rebecca with such force that everyone jumped. She was on her feet, her small body rigid with fury and fear. No, no, no. She ran to her father, grabbing his hands, shaking them as if she could shake sense into him. Words tumbled out in a rush, each one struggled for, fought for, earned through sheer desperate determination. Her voice was rough and unused, cracking on every syllable, but it was there. It was real. Michael good. Michael friend. Help. Michael please. She was crying now, the words breaking apart. Daddy. Please. George dropped to his knees in front of his daughter, this warrior child who'd found her voice to fight for someone she loved. We're going to help him, he promised, his own voice breaking. Whatever it takes, sweetheart. Whatever it takes. Rebecca threw her arms around his neck, and for the first time in 7 years, she sobbed out loud. Messy, broken, beautiful sounds that meant she was finally letting the world in. The next morning, Rebecca stood at the front door dressed in her best blue dress, her small suitcase of communication tools clutched in one hand and Michael's hand gripped tightly in the other. When George tried to suggest she stay home, that court was no place for a child. Rebecca planted her feet and shook her head with a fierceness that left no room for argument. She was going. End of discussion. The courtroom was everything George had feared. Cold fluorescent lights, hard wooden benches, the oppressive weight of institutional justice. Rebecca had never been in such a public space. They'd always protected her from crowds, from strangers' stares, from situations where her silence would make her vulnerable. But she walked in with her chin up, holding Michael's hand on one side and her father's on the other, looking smaller than ever, but somehow unbreakable. The judge reviewed the preliminary arguments, the security footage from the night Michael defended Jasmine, the statements from the other boys' parents demanding justice for their assaulted sons. Michael sat at the defendant's table looking exhausted and resigned, like he'd already accepted his fate. Then the judge asked Michael to explain what happened that night. Before Michael could stand, Rebecca rose to her feet. I speak. The courtroom fell silent. Even the court reporter's fingers froze over her keyboard. The weight of those 2 words, the impossibility of them coming from this child who'd been silent her entire life, created a gravity that pulled every eye to her. George's lawyer started to intervene, but the judge raised his hand. Let her continue. Rebecca's voice was rough, unpracticed, but clear. Michael, teach me. She paused, gathering words like precious stones. He see me, not broken. Rebecca, just Rebecca. She reached for her iPad, typed quickly with trembling fingers, then walked forward and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The courtroom waited in breathless silence as the judge read. "Your Honor," he read aloud, his voice softer than before. "Michael saved his sister like he saved me. Not from bad boys, but from silence. He never asked me to speak. He just showed me it was safe to try. Please don't take him away. He's teaching me to be brave." The judge looked at this tiny girl who'd found her voice to defend a homeless teenager. "How long have you been silent, Rebecca?" "7 years. And you're speaking now for Michael?" Rebecca nodded, then added one more word that seemed to echo off the courtroom walls. "Family." The judge leaned back, studying the case files, the footage, the character testimonials George's lawyers had compiled. But everyone in that room knew it was Rebecca's testimony that mattered. A child who hadn't spoken in 7 years had broken her silence for this moment, for this boy. "It seems to me," the judge said finally, "that Mr. Michael Williams acted in defense of his minor sister against 3 assailants. The fact that he recently turned 18 doesn't negate his right to protect a child from harm. Case dismissed." The courtroom erupted. Rebecca launched herself into Michael's arms with such force they both nearly toppled over. And then it happened. A sound no one had ever heard before. Rebecca laughed, really laughed. The sound was rusty and unpracticed, breaking in places like an instrument being played for the first time. But it was real and joyful and absolutely beautiful. "Thank you," she whispered into Michael's ear, her words still precious and rare. "No, little musician. Thank you." Outside the courthouse, George made a decision that surprised even himself. He'd built his empire on calculated risks and careful planning, but this was neither. This was pure instinct, pure need. "Michael, I want to offer you something. Not charity, a real proposal." He took a breath. "Come live with us. Be Rebecca's companion officially, but also be part of our family. You and Jasmine both. We have more rooms than we know what to do with, and we need you." Michael's pride warred visibly with reality. "Mr. Kraft, I appreciate it, but..." "Michael." Rebecca's voice was stronger now, more certain. "Stay, please. Need you." Linda stepped forward, her own voice thick with emotion. "We all need you. You gave us back our daughter. Let us give you and Jasmine a home." Michael looked at Rebecca's hopeful face, thought of Jasmine crammed into their aunt's tiny apartment, thought of the shelter where he'd been sleeping on a cot between strangers. But more than that, he thought of this family that had somehow become his family. This little girl who'd fought for him when the world said he wasn't worth fighting for. "Not charity?" he confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Family," George said firmly. And this time, it wasn't Rebecca who said it first. "Your family now, Michael. That's what this is. That's what you've always been. From the moment Rebecca chose you." Michael's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down his face as he nodded, unable to form words of his own. Rebecca wrapped her arms around his waist and held on tight. And in that moment, standing outside a courthouse on a Thursday afternoon, a new kind of family was born. One built not on blood or obligation, but on the revolutionary act of being truly seen. 6 months later, the Kraft mansion was unrecognizable. Not physically, it still had the same marble floors and priceless art hanging in gilded frames. But the soul of the place had transformed completely. Jasmine's laughter echoed through halls that had been silent for years, a sound so frequent and unrestrained that the staff had stopped jumping every time it rang out. She and Rebecca had become inseparable, an unlikely pair that somehow made perfect sense. Jasmine taught Rebecca the latest dances, their feet thundering across floors that had only known careful, quiet steps. Rebecca helped Jasmine with homework. The two of them sprawled across the library floor surrounded by books and snacks, and the kind of comfortable chaos George had never imagined his home could hold. Michael was finishing his senior year, his grades soaring now that he didn't have to worry about where his next meal would come from or whether Jasmine was safe. College acceptance letters arrived weekly, full scholarships from schools that had read about him in the news. The story had gone viral. Homeless teen helps billionaire's daughter find her voice. Reporters camped outside the gates for weeks until George's lawyers scared them off. But it was Rebecca's blog that truly captured people's attention. She didn't speak constantly. She probably never would. But what she couldn't always say out loud, she wrote with devastating clarity. Her posts about selective mutism, about the pressure of being fixed, about the loneliness of being seen as a problem rather than a person, reached millions. "I was never broken," she wrote in her most popular post. "I was just waiting for someone who understood that silence can be a choice, not a prison. Michael saw me, not my condition. He heard me even when I didn't speak. That's love." Her 8th birthday party was the first she'd ever wanted. Not the elaborate affairs Linda had planned over the years with entertainers and hundreds of guests Rebecca never wanted to see. This was small, intimate, just family. The word having expanded to include Michael and Jasmine, and a handful of staff who'd become more than employees. As Rebecca blew out her candles, George asked the question he asked every year, even though he'd never gotten an answer before. "What did you wish for, sweetheart?" Rebecca smiled, that sunrise smile that still took his breath away. Already came true. What came true? She looked around the table, Michael helping Jasmine with her cake, her parents holding hands for the first time in years, the butler Marcus sneaking frosting when he thought no one was looking, the warm chaos of people who genuinely loved each other. "This," she said clearly. "Family bigger than blood." Linda was crying again, but they were happy tears this time, the kind that healed instead of hurt. "When did you become so wise?" she asked, reaching across to squeeze her daughter's hand. Rebecca pointed at Michael. "Good teacher." Michael raised his glass of juice, grinning. "To Rebecca, who taught me that the best conversations don't always need words." "To Michael," George countered, his voice thick with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "Who taught us that wealth isn't about what you have, but what you're willing to share." "To family," Jasmine added, her eyes bright. "However it finds you." "To love," Rebecca concluded, her voice stronger than ever. "Always finds way." 1 year later, at Michael's high school graduation, Rebecca gave the surprise speech she'd been practicing in secret for months. She walked to the podium in her yellow dress, and George watched from the audience with his heart in his throat, still hardly believing this was his daughter standing in front of hundreds of people. "My name is Rebecca Kraft," she began, her voice clear and steady. "For 7 years I didn't speak. People thought I was broken. My parents spent millions trying to fix me. But I wasn't broken. I was just waiting." The auditorium was silent, captivated, waiting for someone who would hear me without words. Michael Williams heard me. He saw a silent girl and didn't see a problem to solve. He saw a friend. She looked directly at Michael in his cap and gown, tears already streaming down his face. "You gave me my voice, not by forcing me to speak, but by showing me I was worth listening to, even in silence. You saved me, Michael, not from mutism, but from loneliness." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes, but the most important moment came later, privately, when the families were celebrating at home. Rebecca pulled Michael aside, away from the noise and joy. "Michael, I need to tell you something." "What's that, little musician?" "The first word, happy. That wasn't really my first word." Michael's eyebrows rose in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I spoke once before, when I was 3. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Right after Mom told me we were getting a baby brother or sister, I said, 'Yay.' But then Mom lost the baby, and she was so sad. And I thought," her voice broke, "I thought my word had somehow caused it. So I stopped. I never spoke again until you. Oh, Rebecca. You made me feel safe enough to try again, to believe my words wouldn't hurt anyone." Michael pulled her into a hug, holding tight. "Your words could never hurt anyone. They're too full of love. Just like you." 5 years passed, like chapters in a book that kept getting better with each turn of the page. Michael graduated from Columbia University with honors, his thesis on nonverbal communication and emotional intelligence earning recognition from psychology departments across the country. But grades and accolades weren't what mattered to him. What mattered was the nonprofit he launched 3 months after graduation, a music therapy program specifically designed for children with selective mutism. Rebecca, now 13 and speaking fluently when she chose to, became his first board member and primary spokesperson. She'd grown into her voice the way a plant grows toward sunlight, naturally, inevitably, beautifully. She still chose silence sometimes, but now it was exactly that. A choice, not a prison. The Foundation's inaugural gala transformed the Kraft Mansion's ballroom into something magical. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over donors, therapists, families, and press, all gathered to support what Michael and Rebecca had built from nothing but understanding and love. Rebecca stood at the podium in a blue dress, looking small but unshakable. People ask me what made me speak after 7 years of silence. The answer is simple. She found Michael in the crowd, now 23 but still with that same warm smile that had changed everything. Michael Williams saw me. Not my condition, not my father's money, not the problem I represented. He saw me. Her voice grew stronger. Michael was homeless when we met. Society said he had nothing to offer. But he gave me everything. Patience, understanding, and the radical idea that I was perfect exactly as I was. Silent or speaking, I was enough. The foundation raised $2 million that night. But the moment that truly mattered came afterward, when a young mother approached with her 5-year-old son hiding behind her legs. The boy hadn't spoken since witnessing his father's death. "Can you help him?" the mother whispered, her desperation palpable. Michael knelt down, pulling a bottle from his jacket pocket. He always carried one now. "What's your name, little man?" The boy said nothing, his eyes wide and wary. "That's cool," Michael said with genuine warmth. "Want to make some music?" Rebecca appeared beside them as the boy reached tentatively for the bottle. "Hi, I didn't talk for 7 years. This guy taught me it was okay." She smiled at the boy with complete understanding. "Want to know a secret?" The boy nodded. "Words are just one kind of voice. We're going to help you find all the others first. And then, when you're ready, only when you're ready, the words will come." The mother's eyes filled with tears. "You really think he'll speak again?" Rebecca and Michael exchanged a glance, years of shared understanding passing between them wordlessly. "He'll speak when he has something so important to say that silence isn't big enough to hold it," Rebecca said with certainty. For me, that was saving my friend. For him, it'll be something else. But it will come. How can you be so sure? Michael's smile could have lit the entire room. Because love always finds a voice. Sometimes it just takes a while to choose which one. 10 years after that first Thursday morning by the garbage bins, Dr. Rebecca Kraft stood at yet another podium, this time accepting an award for her groundbreaking research on selective mutism. She'd raced through school, driven by purpose born from her own journey, and was now the youngest recipient of the Psychological Association's Innovation Award. "This award belongs to someone else," she said, her voice clear and confident. She looked at Michael in the audience with his wife, a speech therapist he'd met through the foundation, and their 2 young daughters, who called Rebecca Aunt Becca. "Michael Williams taught me that the greatest therapy isn't about forcing people to fit our idea of normal. It's about meeting them where they are and showing them they're valued exactly as they are." But the real story, the one no cameras captured, happened every Thursday morning when the world wasn't watching. Every single Thursday, without exception, Dr. Rebecca Kraft and director Michael Williams met at the Kraft Mansion, now the Williams Kraft Foundation headquarters. They sat on those same back steps where everything had begun, sorting through recyclables they didn't need to sort, maintaining a ritual that had nothing to do with bottles and everything to do with remembering who they'd been and who they'd become. "Remember when you couldn't speak?" Michael asked, the same question he'd asked for a decade. "Remember when you didn't have a home?" Rebecca responded, their sacred liturgy. Together, their voices blending into one truth. We saved each other. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that didn't need filling because it was already full. Full of gratitude, full of love, full of everything words could never quite capture. A billionaire's silent daughter and a homeless black boy. 2 people the world said had nothing in common except proximity to garbage bins on a Thursday morning. But they'd hurt each other in the silence. They'd found family in the unlikeliest place. They'd proven that sometimes the most profound connections require no words at all, just someone willing to listen. Rebecca had spoken her first word at 7, but she'd been saying everything that mattered all along. It just took Michael to help the rest of the world learn how to listen. And in teaching them to listen, he taught the most important lesson of all. The most powerful voices aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones that wait 7 years for the right person to hear them. Sometimes they come from boys who see treasure where others see trash. Sometimes they emerge from the silence between words where real understanding lives. Always, always, they come from love. And love always finds a way to speak.